What if the secret to never being bothered by anyone was not found in kindness, patience, or even resilience, but in something far colder, far more unsettling? What if the real path to mental power was not about softening your heart, but hardening your mind? Most people spend their lives searching for peace by trying to fix the world around them. They hope others will change, that critics will fall silent, that betrayals will never come. Yet history shows us the opposite. The world never stops testing you, people never stop judging you, and enemies never stop circling. The fragile are broken, the sensitive are manipulated, and those who depend on the approval of others spend their lives in chains. But imagine this instead: a fortress of the mind, a state of being where no insult penetrates, no betrayal shakes you, no whisper of disapproval has the power to control you. Imagine walking through life untouchable, not because the world has become kinder, but because you have become immune. This is not a fantasy. Centuries ago, Niccolo Machiavelli, the man forever linked to cold, political cunning, left behind a set of principles designed for survival in a ruthless world. At the core of his thinking lies one rule, one that, if applied to your own psychology, could make you unbothered by anyone, no matter how cruel, manipulative, or judgmental they might be. But it comes with a price. To wield this kind of mental strength, you must abandon certain illusions. You must let go of the comforting idea that people will treat you fairly. You must shed the hope that the world rewards honesty and vulnerability. And you must be willing to see the human game not as a story of kindness and justice, but as a battlefield of perception and power. The unsettling question, then, is this: are you willing to sacrifice warmth for strength, sensitivity for sovereignty, and approval for unshakable independence? Because the answer to how to never be bothered by anyone lies not in becoming softer, but in embracing the coldest rule of mental power. Why do the words of others cut so deeply? Why does a passing insult, a dismissive glance, or a critical comment have the power to disrupt an entire day? For all our progress, for all the strength we pretend to have, the human mind remains remarkably fragile in the face of judgment. At the core of this weakness lies the ego. Not the ego in its inflated, arrogant form, but the delicate psychological structure that craves recognition, safety, and belonging. From the moment we are born, we are wired to seek approval. A baby cries, and the mother's soothing voice confirms its worth. A child performs, and applause rewards the act. Slowly, we become conditioned to equate our identity with the reflections we see in the eyes of others. Their validation becomes oxygen. Their disapproval becomes suffocation. This dependency makes us vulnerable. When someone insults us, they are not just throwing words into the air. They are threatening the fragile scaffolding of our self-image. An attack on our reputation, our competence, or our character feels like an attack on our very existence. And so we react. Sometimes with anger, sometimes with shame, sometimes with endless rumination that keeps us awake at night. History is filled with examples of great figures destroyed, not by armies, but by insults they could not ignore. Think of Achilles in Homer's epic, whose wrath over wounded pride led to chaos and death, or emperors who squandered power by lashing out at critics, unable to endure the sting of mockery. Even in modern times, entire careers collapse because of a single comment on social media. Amplified into a storm the victim cannot mentally withstand. But it is not only insults that weaken us. Subtle gestures silence where we expected applause. Indifference where we craved recognition can be even more destructive. The absence of validation can leave us gasping for approval like a drowning man gasps for air. And this is precisely why manipulation works so well. Those who understand the psychology of need can control others with the simplest tools: withholding attention, offering praise, delivering criticism at just the right moment to bend someone's will. Cognitive dissonance. deepens this trap. When we believe we are strong, yet find ourselves shattered by an offhand remark, we experience a painful contradiction. We are not who we thought we were. To escape the discomfort, we often overcompensate, seeking revenge, obsessing over our critics, or trying desperately to prove our worth. And in doing so, we hand over even more power to those who disturbed us in the first place. The truth is brutal. The reason people get to you is because you let them define your value. Their voices echo louder in your mind than your own. Their opinions become judges in a courtroom where you are always on trial, forever pleading to be declared innocent, worthy, respected. Yet the more you chase approval, the weaker you become. The harder you try to silence critics, the more they multiply. Like a man swatting at smoke, the effort only spreads the fire. This is why so many collapse under the weight of public opinion, and why so few ever attain the kind of mental fortitude that makes them truly untouchable. Machiavelli saw this centuries ago. He understood that the world is filled with manipulation, betrayal, and judgment, and that the sensitive are doomed to be its victims. To him, the solution was not to seek universal love or protection from insult, but to build an inner fortress. To stand so detached, so coldly independent, that no external blow could disturb the center. But to reach that state requires first confronting the uncomfortable truth of human weakness, that our dependency on validation is the chain that keeps us enslaved. Until we admit this, we cannot break it. In the year 1513, a disgraced diplomat sat in exile outside the city of Florence. His name was Niccolo Machiavelli. Once a trusted advisor to powerful statesmen, he now found himself stripped of influence, accused of conspiracy, and tortured by the very government he had served. Yet, in his humiliation, Machiavelli conceived an idea that would outlive kingdoms. He began to write a small book, one that would scandalize the world and etch his name into eternity. The prince, unlike the moral philosophers of his time, who spoke of justice, virtue, and the noble duties of rulers, Machiavelli stripped away every illusion. He wrote not of how men should behave, but of how they do behave. His world was not one of ideals, but of raw human nature, where loyalty was fragile, kindness was exploited, and power belonged not to the good, but to the shrewd. At the heart of his work was a rule so cold, so unsettling, that it continues to disturb readers centuries later. Machiavelli taught that the opinions and actions of others must never be taken personally, they must be treated as tools. To survive, one must learn to see criticism not as an insult, but as information. Praise not as truth, but as leverage. Betrayal not as heartbreak, but as a move in the eternal chess game of power. This rule was not born of cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was born of necessity. In Machiavelli's world, rulers who allowed themselves to be governed by emotion were quickly destroyed. Those who trusted too easily were betrayed. Those who sought universal approval were mocked. Those who reacted to every insult exposed their weakness, and their enemies devoured them. Only those who learned to detach their emotions from the opinions of others could endure. Machiavelli's cold rule, then, was this: do not let yourself be bothered by the judgments of others. See them as instruments in your strategy, nothing more. In other words, do not surrender your inner fortress to the chaos of external voices. Treat every action against you as a move on the board, and decide not with wounded pride, but with strategic calculation. To many, this sounds ruthless. To Machiavelli, it was simply survival. He observed that people are fickle, selfish, and quick to abandon loyalty when convenience demands it. If you are disturbed every time someone shifts their opinion of you, you will live in perpetual turmoil. But if you learn to see through the mask of human behavior, if you accept betrayal as inevitable, if you detach from the emotional sting of criticism, then you gain the only kind of freedom that matters, the freedom to act without being controlled by others. Consider how radical this was. In a culture that prized honor, Machiavelli dared to suggest that insults need not be avenged, that betrayal should not always provoke outrage, that the truly powerful ruler was the one who remained unmoved. To him, dignity was not found in emotional reaction, but in cold resilience. It was not the heated response that preserved kingdoms, but the icy refusal to be rattled. And here lies the essence of Machiavelli's coldest rule for mental power. Others may speak, judge, betray, or attempt to wound, but you decide whether their actions touch you. If you let them inside your mind, they become your masters. If you hold them at a distance, as pieces on a board, you remain untouchable. Machiavelli's genius was not in teaching cruelty, but in revealing the hidden machinery of human interaction. He dared to write what most feared to admit, that life is not a stage of fairness and virtue, but a battlefield of perception and power, and those who survive are not the most moral, nor the most beloved, but the ones who refuse to be ruled by the emotions of others. What does it really mean to be cold? To most people, the word suggests cruelty, apathy, or the absence of feeling. But the kind of coldness Machiavelli speaks of is not about rejecting humanity, it is about reclaiming control. It is the deliberate practice of detachment, the ability to remain unmoved when the world tries to pull you into emotional storms. And the truth is, psychology confirms what Machiavelli intuited centuries ago. Detachment is power. The reactive mind is a fragile mind. It lives in constant submission to its environment. If praised, it soars. If insulted, it crumbles. Like dry wood, it ignites at the slightest spark. The detached mind, on the other hand, is like stone. Flames may lick at its surface, but they find nothing to consume. This difference, the ability to observe without being consumed, is the difference between those who are controlled by others and those who controlled themselves. Modern psychology calls this emotional regulation. It is not the absence of feeling, but the ability to master it. Studies in neuroscience show that the brain's amygdala, which governs emotional reactions, is constantly triggered by threats to status, reputation, or belonging. An insult, even a mild one, lights up the same neural pathways as physical pain. But when the prefrontal cortex, the seat of higher reasoning, intervenes, the flame of reaction can be extinguished. Detachment, then, is the training of the mind to respond with strategy rather than reflex. Stoic philosophers described this centuries before brain scans confirmed it. Marcus Aurelius wrote that if you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment about it. This is precisely what Machiavelli applied to politics and power. It is not the insult itself that weakens you, but your choice to let it invade your fortress. Detachment works because it rewrites the power dynamic. When someone insults you, their intention is to provoke. They want to see you flinch, defend, or retaliate. The moment you react, they succeed. You are no longer acting, you are being acted upon. But when you refuse to give them the reaction they seek, when you treat their words as background noise or data to be studied, you deny them power. You become the strategist, not the pawn. This does not mean you never act. Coldness is not passivity, it is clarity. A detached ruler may still punish betrayal, but not because he is wounded, because it serves a purpose. A detached mind may still respond to criticism, but not out of insecurity, out of calculated advantage. The difference is everything. One is reaction, the other is decision. Consider the workplace. An employee criticized by a manager may spiral into defensiveness, self-doubt, or anger. Another, practicing detachment, listens as if gathering intelligence. Instead of thinking they are attacking me, they think, this is information about how they see me. How can I use it? One walks away wounded, the other walks away armed. Coldness works because it transforms perception. When you detach, the same event changes meaning. A betrayal is no longer a personal tragedy, it is confirmation of human nature. An insult is no longer a dagger, is a revelation of the insulter's character. A loss of approval is no longer suffocation, it is proof of your independence. By stripping emotion from the event, you rob it of its poison. And perhaps most importantly, detachment works because it preserves energy. How much of life is wasted on rumination, replaying slights, rehearsing comebacks, drowning in imagined judgments? Each hour spent in mental turmoil is an hour handed over to someone else's influence. Detachment reclaims that energy. It is not suppression, but liberation, the refusal to be enslaved by the noise of others. Machiavelli may not have used the language of neuroscience or stoicism, but his principle aligns with both. Coldness is freedom. It does not mean you cannot feel. It means you are no longer ruled by feeling. It does not mean you abandon humanity. It means you choose when, where, and how to engage it. In a world where most are puppets pulled by the strings of emotion, detachment cuts the cords. History is a graveyard of rulers, undone by their inability to detach. Yet it is also a stage where a select few, armed with coldness, preserved empires, outwitted enemies, and carved their names into eternity. These are not stories of kindness or sensitivity, they are stories of composure in the face of betrayal, of detachment in the midst of chaos. Consider Cesare Borgia, the ruthless Italian nobleman whom Machiavelli himself admired. Surrounded by treachery and shifting alliances, Borgia understood the futility of outrage. When supposed allies turned against him, he did not collapse in grief or lash out in reckless fury. He responded with precision. Cold calculation allowed him to turn betrayals into opportunities, dismantling rivals not in fits of passion but in carefully orchestrated maneuvers. To his enemies, his calm was terrifying, because they could not read him, nor could they provoke him. Contrast this with the fate of Commodus, the Roman emperor whose vanity and sensitivity made him vulnerable. Obsessed with his public image, Commodus sought constant validation as a gladiator in the arena. Any hint of mockery sent him spiraling into paranoia. His reign became defined by overreaction, cruelty born of insecurity, and reckless decisions driven by wounded pride. Where Borgia's detachment preserved control, Commodus' fragility dragged Rome into decay. The lesson repeats across centuries. Napoleon Bonaparte, in his rise, demonstrated icy composure. In moments of defeat, where others would have raged or despaired, he analyzed, recalculated, and struck again with sharper precision. His enemies feared not only his armies, but his mind, a mind that refused to be distracted by humiliation. Yet later in life, when ego eclipsed detachment, he began to falter. His obsession with personal glory led him into costly mistakes. Even a man of genius could not escape the consequences of attachment to image. We find similar contrasts in more recent history. Winston Churchill, for all his flaws, embodied a kind of cold detachment during Britain's darkest hour. When news of devastating bombings arrived, he did not collapse into despair, nor did he lash out at critics. Instead, he translated fear into focus, responding with speeches that projected calm strength while privately detaching from the chaos around him. His refusal to be visibly shaken allowed an entire nation to hold its nerve. Now compare this to leaders undone by emotional reactivity. Richard Nixon, for instance, allowed his sensitivity to criticism to grow into paranoia. Unable to detach from his enemies, he became consumed by them. What began as political rivalry turned into obsession. Culminating in the Watergate scandal, Nixon was not destroyed by superior opponents, but by his inability to remain unbothered. His downfall was not a failure of strategy, but a failure of psychology. Detachment, when applied at the highest levels of power, becomes more than a personal virtue. It becomes a survival mechanism for entire states. Leaders who collapse at Insults risk dragging their nations into chaos. Leaders who remain unmoved, even in the face of betrayal, project stability that outlasts storms. History punishes fragility and rewards composure, but the lesson is not reserved for rulers. Even in smaller scales, business, culture, personal relationships, the same dynamic applies. Consider CEOs who refuse to be provoked by media storms, letting outrage burn itself out while they focus on long-term strategy. Their competitors, caught in reactive cycles, waste resources on defending reputations, while the detached leader advances unshaken. Or think of revolutionaries who endure slander and imprisonment, yet remain unmoved, turning persecution into fuel for movements that change the world. The pattern is clear. Sensitivity exposes weakness, while detachment creates an aura of invincibility. Coldness unsettles opponents because it denies them the satisfaction of control. When you refuse to react, you become unpredictable. When you are unbothered, you become untouchable. Machiavelli understood this truth, not as theory but as observation. He had seen kingdoms fall because rulers allowed their emotions to dictate action. He had seen power preserved only by those who treated human behavior as a predictable pattern rather than a personal wound. And so his rule remains as relevant now as it was in Renaissance Italy. If you wish to endure, you must build the kind of cold detachment that history has always rewarded. The empires that survived did not belong to those who fought every insult or sought every man's approval. They belonged to those who turned their minds into fortresses, who responded not with wounded pride but with silent calculation. And it is this quality, the ability to remain unbothered, that separates the rulers who leave legacies from the ones who become footnotes. Centuries have passed since Machiavelli wrote The Prince, yet the battlefield of human interaction has not disappeared, has only changed shape. Where rulers once navigated courts of intrigue, we now navigate offices, online networks, and social circles. Where whispers once traveled through palaces, they now spread instantly across digital platforms. And in this new world, the need for detachment is greater than ever. The average person today is more exposed to judgment than kings once were. A single tweet, a careless comment, a misunderstood post can spark waves of criticism from strangers around the globe. Social media has turned everyone into a public figure, constantly performing on a stage of invisible judges. And just as Machiavelli warned, those who are easily disturbed by opinions are the first to crumble. How many lives, reputations, even careers have been shattered not by real failure, but by the inability to withstand the noise of disapproval. To become untouchable today is not to withdraw from the world, but to change how you engage with it. It begins with a simple but radical shift, treating criticism, praise, and judgment not as truths, but as signals. Every insult reveals something about the insulter, not about you. Every compliment reveals someone's desires, not your essence. Every betrayal reveals human nature, not your worth. When you make this shift, you reclaim control over interpretation. Take the workplace as an example. Most people enter professional environments craving validation from managers and colleagues. They are elated by praise and devastated by critique. But a Machiavellian mindset sees both as data. Criticism becomes intelligence. This is how they perceive my work. How can I use this to my advantage? Praise becomes currency. This is what they value. How can I leverage this perception? The detached worker does not collapse under feedback. They weaponize it. The same principle applies to relationships. Emotional reactivity is one of the most common forms of weakness. A partner's harsh words or cold silence can trigger spirals of anger, desperation, or insecurity. But detachment changes the frame. Instead of thinking, "They are hurting me," you think, "This is information about their state of mind, not my value." Instead of reacting in kind, you observe, assess, and decide from a position of strength. Coldness here is not cruelty, is clarity, the refusal to surrender control of your emotions to another person's whims. And then there is the battlefield of social media, where outrage is currency and sensitivity is exploited for clicks. Entire platforms thrive on provoking emotional reactions. If you are offended, they win. If you rage, they win. If you spiral into anxiety because of strangers' opinions, they win. The only way to win yourself is to detach, to treat digital criticism like static, noise without meaning. When you stop feeding the system your energy, you not only protect your mind, you also rise above the endless cycle of reaction that keeps millions enslaved. But how, practically, does one cultivate this detachment? It begins with discipline. Just as the body is trained through repetition, the mind is trained through practice. The first step is awareness. Notice your triggers. Pay attention to the moments when someone's words ignite anger or insecurity. Instead of reacting instantly, pause. Ask yourself, what exactly am I reacting to? The words or my interpretation of them? This pause creates space between stimulus and response, the birthplace of freedom. Second, reframe the insult. When someone attacks you, remember, they reveal more about themselves than about you. A jealous colleague's criticism is a confession of envy. A stranger's insult online is a projection of their own dissatisfaction. Once you begin to see attacks as windows into other people's psychology rather than reflections of your own worth, their sting dissolves. Third, practice selective focus. Energy flows where attention goes. If you dwell on negative voices, you empower them. If you choose to focus instead on your goals, your craft, your strategy, the noise fades into the background. Detachment is not indifference to life, is indifference to distraction. Fourth, develop what psychologists call a locus of control. Those with an external locus believe their lives are defined by others' opinions and circumstances. Those with an internal locus know that meaning comes from their own choices. Machiavelli's cold rule is, in essence, the ultimate internal locus. Your value is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to interpret and respond. Finally, embrace inevitability. Betrayal will happen. Criticism will happen. Judgment will happen. To be disturbed by them is like being shocked that rain falls or that fire burns. Once you accept them as natural laws of human interaction, they lose their power to surprise or wound you. Coldness is simply the refusal to be naive. But here is the paradox. The more detached you become, the more influence you gain. The man who cannot be provoked holds the highest ground. In business, relationships, and society, people sense this strength. They know they cannot control you with flattery or insult, and so they begin to respect you, even fear you. Coldness breeds authority not because you impose it, but because you embody it. To be unbothered in today's world is not to become emotionless, is to become unshakable. It is to walk through the noise of opinions, as if through a storm, your mind a fortress untouched by the winds. And in a time when everyone is enslaved by reaction, the one who remains calm becomes the rarest and most powerful figure of all, untouchable, sovereign, free. Every philosophy that promises strength carries a shadow. To live as if nothing can touch you, to cultivate an aura of cold detachment, is not without its price. For while indifference can shield the mind from chaos, it can also suffocate the warmth of being human. Consider the paradox. In becoming untouchable, you may also become unreachable. The very coldness that protects you from manipulation may also freeze the bonds that make life meaningful. Friends may mistake your calm for arrogance. Lovers may interpret your emotional distance as neglect. Even allies may sense in you a quiet ruthlessness that keeps them forever at arm's length. History offers warnings as sharp as its lessons. The same emperors and rulers who mastered detachment often died in solitude, surrounded by subjects who respected them but never truly loved them. Machiavelli himself acknowledged this tension. It is safer to be feared than loved, but safest of all is to balance the two. Yet balance is rarely achieved, and in choosing coldness, many find themselves drifting into isolation. On the psychological level, detachment can evolve into numbness. What begins as discipline can end in victories feel hollow, where resilience becomes emptiness. To suppress anger, pain, and insult is powerful. But to suppress joy, intimacy, and trust is tragic. The lesson is clear. Machiavellian coldness is a weapon, not a way of life. It should be wielded with precision, not worshipped as identity. For the ultimate power is not to feel nothing, is to choose when to feel and when not to. Detachment, in its truest form, is not the death of emotion, but the mastery of it. In the end, the philosophy of not caring is not about apathy. It is not about turning your heart to stone, nor about rejecting the beauty of human connection. Its essence lies in power, the quiet, immovable power that comes when your self-worth is no longer hostage to the judgments of others. To not care is to stand in the storm without bending, to walk through a world of manipulation without being pulled by invisible strings. It is the art of choosing what deserves your energy and what deserves nothing at all. When you refuse to be governed by insult, betrayal, or the shifting tides of approval, you reclaim the rarest freedom, sovereignty, over yourself. Think of it as armor, not one that dulls your spirit, but one that protects its flame. With detachment, rejection cannot define you, criticism cannot diminish you, and failure cannot destroy you. You learn to see insults as noise, not wounds, betrayal as revelation, not tragedy, defeat as delay, not death. This is why coldness, when tempered with wisdom, becomes an engine of resilience. Yet true mastery lies in balance. The goal is not to kill emotion, but to command it. A man who feels nothing is not strong, but broken. A man who feels deeply, yet chooses when to show it, when to guard it, when to withdraw it, that is strength in its purest form. The true power of not caring is not indifference, but control. So ask yourself, how much of your life has been stolen by fear of what others think? How many choices bent to the weight of judgment? How many dreams abandoned to the echo of doubt? The philosophy of detachment is not an escape, it is a liberation. It does not teach you to flee the world, but to move through it untouchable, immune to its claws, untamed by its pressures. This is the final lesson. When you stop caring about the meaningless, you create space for what truly matters. And in that space, you will discover something far greater than coldness. You will discover power, freedom, and the unshakable self that no hand, no betrayal, no empire can ever take away.